A cold arc of light struck stone as the archivist stepped into the crypt and saw an apprentice's compass burning along a carved groove. Suspicion tightened his hands before he spoke. He dropped his satchel and moved forward. "Stop," the archivist. The apprentice froze, the compass point still scoring faint phosphor against the mortar. The first 5 sentences carried immediate danger. A forbidden tool in use beneath the nave erased measurements and a hidden sigil half exposed. The archivist kept his voice flat. He wanted answers, not flight. He wanted to know why a ratio had been scratched away from a master plan and then secretly retraced. They stood over the same stone the masons had set a generation before. This stone bore a circle of faint knife marks and a shallow inlay where mortar had been removed. The apprentice's hand trembled as he wiped a chalk smear with the heel of his palm. He did not look the archivist in the eye. "Name yourself," the archivist. The apprentice swallowed. "Tum," he said. His fingers unclenched around the compass cord. Suspicion drove the archivist's first moves. He set his brass compass on the stone and let light fall across the faint arc Tum had drawn. The arc did not align with usual proportions. A side measurement had been erased cleanly, as if someone intended the ratio to disappear. Tum jabbed a finger at the scarred line. "It shouldn't be here," he said. "We were told to avoid this. It breaks things." The master who? The archivist interrupted. "Master Aldrin, Toom." He spoke quickly, words spilling. "I found the plan in the chest. I tried to measure, and the line glowed. I tried to erase it, and someone had already rubbed out the number. I thought I could fix it later." His eyes were dry with fear. The archivist moved in, examining the margin where the erased figure must have been. He lifted his field journal from his cloak and flipped to a blank page. He did not ask for permission. He smelled stone dust and cold incense. He made a single notation. A crossed circle, a small caret, the outline of a rose window. Outside the crypt, the bells had not yet chimed. The archivist kept his face neutral and guided Tom up the stair into the mason's workshop. Tools lay along the tables. Adzes with darkened handles, measuring rods, half-finished capitals. The master mason stood near a lathe, hands stained with lime. Aldrin, the archivist, laying the scraped plan on the table. He left the compass where Tum had set it, brass catching the guttering torchlight. "Why is this missing?" Aldrin frowned. He ran a hand over his jaw. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From the crypt, from under the nave. Your apprentice Tom was tracing an arc and found an erased figure." The archivist looked at Tom, explained. Tom stepped forward. "Aldrin, I found a ratio on the plan. It was rubbed away. I traced it." The line glowed. "Men in the chapel are falling sick. There was one who went mad. You sent us to finish that chapel, and—" Aldrin cut him off. "Tum, stop. You speak without thinking." He kept his voice low, but the note of command sharpened his words. The archivist leaned on the table. "Aldrin, show me the original ledger. Show me the measurements you keep with the master marks. If this is an erasure, it is deliberate. Who ordered it?" Aldrin hesitated. His fingers tightened around the rim of a wooden cup. "We follow the Brotherhood's rules. The Church gives oversight. If a plan is altered, it is for sanctity. You should not have gone prowling in the crypt." He did not deny the erasure. Suspicion shifted toward accusation. The archivist read that shift in the set of Aldrin's shoulders. He reached for the lathe chisel and tapped the edge of the plan where erasure had been deepest. Dust fell like a fine grey rain. Tom's voice came lower. "Why would they forbid a proportion?" he asked. "Who would carve a sigil and then hide it?" Aldrin rubbed his temple. "Orders," he said. "Orders from the canon, from the chapter. We keep the lines clean so the people pray without trouble. That is all." That is all, as if it closed the matter. Instead of closure, the words opened a line of pressure. The archivist pressed. "Bring the crate marked archival from the back. The one stamped with the mason's sigil." He needed the secondary records, the journals the masons kept out of sight of the clergy. They found the crate beneath a pile of sawdust. The archivist pried the lid. Inside lay rolled vellum, mason's marks, and at the bottom a small folio bound in rough leather. The cover had been scorched at one corner. The archivist smelled smoke and lime. He brought the folio to the table and opened it. The folio contained entries in a spare hand. The archivist read aloud as he traced lines with a gloved finger. No measure that yields the spiral fraction shall be used. Breach follows if used without ceremony, he read. Tum leaned in, breach. Tum echoed like the men who went mad, listen. Aldrin, that language is old. It is ritual phrasing. It warns of faults in workmanship. Every guild has superstitions. We did not take this literally. We made allowances. He tried to make the past sound reasonable. The archivist's suspicion shifted again, this time into a narrower, sharper inquiry. Did the avoidance stem from superstition or from enforced doctrine? He tapped the page. Where did you get this folio? Aldrin looked away. It came with the chapel plans. From the chapter house. We were told to consult it on certain points. That is all. His jaw worked. Tum, then why seal that chapel? Men fell ill afterwards. Master Len took to his bed and would not rise. The mason Beric began speaking strange prayers and then smashed his own chisels with his fists. He died on the road. They blamed fever, but the men said the windows made them cough blood. I saw a man with a cut across his cheek who whispered numbers in the margins and would not stop. He swallowed. I cleaned mortar from a sill and found a sigil beneath. I traced the ratio only to see the mortar split. I could taste iron in my mouth. Aldrin rubbed his brow. You tell stories, Tom. You find a smear and you make a ghost. We have work to do. We cannot stop building because of a child's fear. His tone hardened into dismissal. A confrontation formed. The archivist stepped between them. Aldrin, we will inspect the chapel. If a proportion is causing structural failure or sickness, the chapter must know. We cannot bury this in superstition. Aldrin's eyes flashed. You would bring the chapter into a mason's mistake. You would publicize an error and ruin reputations. He raised his voice. Tom shot back. Aldrin, stop acting like this is about reputation. Men are ill. Beric is dead. Aldrin, he had a stroke. You cannot make a sign out of every misfortune. His voice had an edge now. The argument tightened into a rapid exchange. Aldrin, show us the ledger entries for the chapel. The archivist demanded. Bring the ledger now. The archivist's hand hovered over the folio. Aldrin's reply came clipped. You will not take anything from this workshop. You will not put the chapter in panic. He barked the word panic as a finality. Tum, master! And then, quieter, Master Aldrin, please. His plea did not slow Aldrin. The archivist closed the folio and slid it beneath his cloak. He did it quickly, not violently. He also pocketed a small folded note the folio had concealed. He did not announce the theft. He moved like a man who had decided a slow and secret course. At the gate of the workshop, a candle guttered as the canon arrived. The canon's cassock brushed stone. He carried a book wrapped in cloth. He looked at the plan on the table, and then at the archivist. What is happening here? The canon. Aldrin moved to explain. Canon, this man has found an alteration. He wishes to bring it to your notice. Canon Morel turned the plan with slow fingers. He watched the erased margin as if reading the lines of a patient. This is dangerous, he said. If the builders introduce odd measures, they invite scandal. The chapter will not permit it. Seal the plan. Hide the chapel. I will summon the council. His tone was official and closing. The archivist, Canon, the folio warns of a ratio and of breach. We must inspect the chapel. Men are sick. He used measured cadence, as his mannerisms advised. Morel's eyes cooled. The church does not tolerate needless alarm. Destroy the plan or conceal it in the chest. Send the men away. If a superstition troubles them, we will remove the cause by prayer and penance. He spoke the formula of authority. Aldrin bent. He picked up a hammer and slammed it onto the plan. Dust flew. We will do as you command. Canon, he looked at the archivist with sharp reproach. The archivist did not comply. He watched the canon's hands. He felt the second emotion shift. From suspicion to anger. Anger at concealment replaced his earlier doubt. He kept his voice low. "You will not destroy evidence before we inspect the site." "I will lead a small party at dawn." Morel's mouth tightened. "You are overstepping. The chapter oversees. I will authorize the sealing. The men will be bound to silence." Tom stepped forward. "Can, please. My fellows are sick. We need a proper inspection. If the ratio was used, it must be corrected." He met Morel's gaze. Morel's eyes flicked to Aldrin and then to Tom. "You would accuse your masters in public?" he asked. "You would hold the chapter to blame for misfortune?" Tom's voice cracked. "Canon Morel, people are dying. We work with the stones. We do not seek conflict. Let us measure. Let us see." The canon looked at the faces around him. He saw a master whose hands had been steady for decades. He saw an apprentice who had not yet learned the cost of lines. He saw an archivist who moved between guild and chapter. He made a decision that forced the next external event: seal the chapel for now. "Canon Morel, the men are to be kept away. The master will remain in the workshop under observation. I will summon the council on the morrow. If you take this any further, you will answer to me." He spoke with legal finality. The archivist felt the anger settle into a colder focus. A plan for quiet inquiry. He would not comply with the sealing as a full stop. He would not hand the folio back. He had already taken a small lead plate from the rubble in the crypt. He kept it warm in the palm of his glove and turned it over with a fingernail. The plate bore a carved rule. Not a number, but a set of overlapping arcs and a small sigil incised into the metal. Dawn came thin and grey. The party approached the ruined chapel in silence. A low mist lay along the footpath. The archivist's pace was steady, his hands steady, though Tom's breathing quickened. Aldrin walked with measured steps. The canon had ordered the doorway sealed, but the archivist had a key of his own design, and he used it. The chapel smelt of lime and stale incense. Inside, the rose window had been rebuilt, but the traceries were off by a fraction. The archivist set his compass at the center and measured. The arcs did not match standard vaulting proportions. One line, if extended, would produce a spiral fraction that matched the plate's arcs. Tom bent to the sill and ran a finger along a carved sigil tucked between stones. His hand shook and he left a smear of mortar on the floor. "There it is. The mark is here." The men said the air felt wrong after we set that window. They coughed and some could not stop counting. He spat on the stone and then recoiled, tasting metal. Aldrin fell to his knees and pressed his palm to the wall, where a hairline fracture ran from sill to arch. "This is not superstition," he said. "This is structural. The geometry is wrong." He attempted to brace a loose stone with his shoulder. It shifted under his weight and scraped his elbow. The archivist placed his compass on the ground and circled a line with chalk. He traced the arcs and then overlaid the lead plate. The arcs fit. The carved sigil in the mortar matched the plate's sigil. He felt a vibration through the tool, a subtle tick under his fingertips. He reported it aloud. "There is a resonance. When the line aligns, stone settles differently." Tom backed away. "I felt it," he said. "When the mortar split, I heard a hum." Beric the chapel sang. He had called to him in numbers. Aldrin frowned. "We can correct the geometry. We can replace the arch bars. We can recut the tracery. Why was this used at all?" The archivist's decision shifted again from anger to focused fear. Fear of an active agent in the geometry, and fear of what authorities would do if they understood. He ordered repairs. "We will test corrective measures. We will not remove the window until we know the cause. We will mark every measurement and note each worker's symptoms." As they began, a low vibration ran across the stone. A panel along the nave sheared with a dry, metallic sound. Dust fell. Aldrin staggered backward and struck his head on a bench. He did not scream. He crumpled, clutching his chest. His breath came short. Tom grabbed for him. "Aldrin!" Tom shouted. "Aldrin, speak to me!" The archivist knelt. He pressed his fingers to Aldrin's wrist and found a pulse that fluttered and then thinned. Aldrin's eyes rolled up. He made a sound in his throat, not words. He had always been steady. Now he trembled. The low vibration rose into a thread of pressure the archivist felt along his teeth. His jaw clenched. He tasted iron. He pushed back and was thrown by a sudden movement of air as if a wall had exhaled. He hit the stone and his head struck cool mortar. He saw a flash. The carved sigil burned bright in the dust. He forced himself up. Tom was on his feet, voice raw. "We have to leave him. He will die here. We have to get him out." His hands were shaking. The archivist pulled a bandage from his satchel and pressed it to Aldrin's brow. Aldrin's breath came ragged. The archivist examined the fracture. The hairline had widened. He felt the second plot twist. The geometry did not merely weaken stone. It generated a pattern of resonance that affected men's bodies. They carried Aldrin out. At the threshold the canon waited with 2 deacons. He looked at Aldrin and then at the plan. His face did not show surprise. It registered calculation. "You defied my order." Morrill to the archivist. "You will answer for this intrusion." The archivist nothing. He placed the lead plate into his coat and closed his hand around it. He had to choose. Return the plate to the canon or keep it hidden. The archivist's hands were steady now, voice low. "Canon, the chapel must be sealed. But do not order the men away without examination. Take Aldrin to the infirmary first." Morrell's mouth thinned. "I will seal the chapel. I will ensure the plan is concealed. No one shall speak of this. The chapter's decision will hold." Tom stared at Morrell. "Canon Morrell, if you seal it, more men will be sick. We need to record measurements." His words were an attempt to make the canon see. Morrell turned his back to him. "Enough." He motioned at the deacons. "Seize that plan and seal the doorway." He spoke to the deacons with a priest's certainty. The deacons moved forward. The archivist stepped between them and the doorway. He spoke quickly and clipped, forcing physical action to carry his argument. "You will not seal the doorway until you let me take a sample and measure the stone. If you insist on secrecy, you will only condemn more men." He kept his tone tight. The deacons hesitated. One touched the stone and then stepped back. He nothing. The canon made a decision that closed the chapter's immediate conflict, but opened another. "Seal it, Morrell. The men will not work there until the council decides. Any further tampering is forbidden." They wrapped the rose window with boards. The archivist watched the last board settle and felt a concrete shift. The work had been stopped, the chapel sealed, and the master mason laid low. He also felt the sharp certainty that the plate in his pocket had changed everything. He slipped it from his glove and ran a finger along the arcs. The sigilless cut was precise. He pressed his thumb into the lead where the line crossed the small carved emblem. Tom touched the archivist's sleeve. "What will you do, Tom?" The archivist folded the plate into the inner fold of his journal. "We gather records," he said. "We find the origin of that plate. We find who inscribed the ratio and why. The chapel will stay sealed, but the knowledge must not be buried." They left the chapel. The canon walked back toward the chapter house, robes whispering. Aldrin was supported by 2 men, sweat staining his collar. Tom followed with a slow step. The archivist held the folio and the small plate close. Before they reached the workshop, the archivist turned and slipped through a side lane. He moved like a man who had decided not to wait for permission. He would begin quietly and thoroughly. He had a single seed of a plan. To trace the lead plate, to test its arcs, to find who had ordered such a proportion used on sacred glass. He would keep it secret until he had proof. At the courtyard gate a single deacon paused and called the archivist by name. "Archivist," he said, "the chapter will convene at first light. Expect summons." He spoke without accusation, only duty. The archivist nodded. He did not reply. He walked into the morning with the plate folded under his arm. He felt the final emotion shift of the chapter. Resolve narrowed from fear. He would not let the canon's sealing become an erasure. He had taken one concrete step. A hidden plate, a wrapped folio, and the decision to pursue the origin. The workshop doors closed behind them with a slotted, procedural sound. They sealed the chapel. They bound the master to a couch in the infirmary. The canon wrote an order. The archivist kept the folio and the plate. The local workmen muttered among themselves. Tom refused to sleep. In the last light before the chapter ended, the archivist sat at a small table and reopened the folio. He placed the lead plate over the inked arcs and drew a thin dusting of charcoal along the incision. The lines matched. He wrote a single, clear note in the margin. Origin unknown. Plate traces to unknown smithwork. Investigate chapter records for 7 years prior. He folded the folio and slid the plate into his pocket, beneath the leather of his journal. A knock came at the workshop door just as he rose. The sound was a short, deliberate rap. He moved to answer, hand already on the latch of the chest, where he now hid other documents. He opened the door to a deacon with a sealed missive. The deacon handed the scroll without comment and stepped back. The archivist unrolled the scroll and read the canons shortened. It summoned him to the chapter house at dawn. It demanded the folio and every plan related to the chapel. It warned against unauthorized measurements. He folded the scroll and slipped it into his cloak. He left the plate where it lay against his chest. He locked the workshop door, clipped the key to a hidden nail, and let Tom sit up watching the coals of the hearth. The archivist's hands smelled of mortar and ink. The chapter ended with a concrete beat. A summon to the chapter house and a decree that sealed the work for the morning. The archivist had stolen a plate and hidden a folio. He had arranged for an inspection and then watched the canon close the doorway. The conflict, whether to expose the forbidden ratio, was resolved for now only by enforced silence and a private vow. He stood in the dark with his journal open and the plate cool against his heart. He would not allow the line to vanish into a sealed chest. He shoved the workshop door open and saw Thomas compass point gauging the full-scale plan. The brass still smelled of heated metal. Suspicion tightened his hands as he stepped over wood shavings and spilled charcoal, and he said, "Stop, Thomas." The apprentice jerked the instrument back. The line on the vellum cut like a wound. The immediate problem was visible. The plan bore a ratio they had sworn to avoid, the same proportion whispered about in margin notes and banned from the master books. That forbidden proportion returned to cathedrals' design, and the archivist understood the stakes at once. He moved forward and touched the chalk line with the pad of his finger, feeling grit and the faint warmth where the compass had just been. Suspicion sat in his throat. He measured his breath, counted the millimeters with a glance, and set his jaw. The workshop smelled of resin and old mortar. He remembered the crypt compass, the one he found months earlier with its point scorched into a carved groove. The memory of that bright phosphor under stone was exact and unambiguous. He had seen a compass burn in the crypt. He had put it away in his satchel and left that night with a raw, private certainty. And now this compass lay warm on the table below the nave. "Thomas, why are you drawing that line?" The archivist kept his voice low, but the sentence was a demand. Thomas swallowed and answered, "I was told to follow the plan, sir. I only used what was in the beam's joint." His hands trembled when he pushed the compass into his belt. The archivist's suspicion shifted to doubt as he scanned the room for evidence. Who you?" Thomas avoided his eyes and said, "Master Elaine, older rules were needed." He whispered it at the supper. The doubt moved into a slow tightening across the archivist's ribs. He had to test whether this was obedience, deception, or a deliberate reintroduction. He stepped back and looked at the plan in full. The forbidden proportion bisected the nave in a way that would alter how stress carried through the pyres. It was not a meaningless line. It was an intervention. The archivist took out his brass compass, the one he wore on a cord, and matched points with Thomas's drawing. The measures aligned with the band ratio. He felt a cold clarity settle. This was intentional. Footsteps at the door brought Master Elaine into the light, his cloak smelling of oil and sweat. "What is this commotion?" Elaine barked. His authority arrived before he did. Masons straightened and apprentices fell silent. "Elaine," The archivist, Thomas, is tracing a prohibited proportion. Elaine's face tightened. He looked at Thomas, then at the plan, then back to the archivist with a face that measured consequence. You speak without proof. Elaine. His words were edged but economical. Elaine, the line matches the old notes I found last night in the beam. The archivist pressed. You hid a folded vellum here. Elaine's eyes flicked to a timber joint where a sliver of vellum had been caught. Foreman Hugo stepped forward and grabbed the scrap, his hands broad and blunt from years of lifting stone. Hugo peeled the parchment free and unfolded it. The workshop quieted to a thin hum of breath. Hugo read aloud to correct the lean. Insert ratio of 2 to the square, E. He stopped. His voice clipped. This is not a scribble. This is instruction, Brother Matthew, a cleric who had come to inspect the alignment earlier that evening, crossed himself without ceremony. We agreed these proportions invite trouble, he said, his fingers cold on the cord of his rosary. He moved closer to the plan, eyes fixed on the chalk line, and his pronouncement shifted the room's temperature from doubt to fear. Confrontation tightened. Elaine's jaw worked. You do not understand the foundations, he said to Matthew. You do not lift granite and set its course. I have seen a fissure form in stone when men trusted only priests and not craft. The master refused to build a church that will fall, Matthew retorted, and you would force a church to host a secret. We agreed no ratios that call to the old law. The bishop forbade it, his voice held a brittle edge. The two men traded 3 quick lines, each sentence clipped like a chisel strike. Elaine, the archivist, stepping between them. We need to be precise. We need to see the source of this vellum. His hand went toward the joint, where the vellum had been hidden. They carried the plan onto the floor. Thomas, still pale, pointed at a fold in the parchment. The archivist unfolded the vellum and found diagrams drawn with a steady, practiced hand. The margin contained a name and a date. The archivist felt anger rise. The name matched a master who had been recorded as dead for 20 years. He read the margin aloud to keep the words physical. Master Bino T, corrective measure to correct the East Foundation, 1208. Elaine's mouth went thin. Bino T was my teacher, he admitted quietly. The confession changed the room's shape. The archivist's suspicion found a new route. It shifted to betrayal. He watched Elaine's hands, watched the small tremor in his fingers when he reached for the vellum. You concealed Bino T's correction. The archivist, why? Elaine's defense came in quick, clipped lines. Bino T was reckless with proportion. He hid ratios to make walls lean a certain way. He meant to correct a crack in the choir, and everyone paid for it. I sealed his notes because the bishop ordered. He stopped and glanced at Matthew. The bishop ordered caution, yes. But I kept these because the choir still leans. I thought I could set it right without telling the chapter. The archivist pressed. Set it right for whom, Elaine? His voice held a controlled H that kept the argument moving. The room split between skill and doctrine. Foreman Hugo, if the master did this to fix a flaw, why hide it now? Why hide a rule that changes a structure? His voice carried the city's practical outrage. An argument began to unfold in short exchanges. You betrayed the rule, Hugo. You betrayed the chapter. Matthew shot back. I betrayed nothing. Elaine returned. I acted to save the walls, he said. The archivist watched each face. He watched Thomas' eyes move from hand to hand, as if that apprentice tried to hold the balance between master and cleric. The archivist's suspicion hardened into a need to find a physical proof beyond the vellum's instruction. He the room for the suspended model used to test weight distribution. The masons dragged the rig into the center beneath the hanging beam. They set the scale model over the plan and fastened a timber in mock placement. While the men worked, the archivist noticed a small scratch on the underside of the beam. A carved mark that matched a sigil he'd once seen in an old ledger. He touched the scratch and felt dust under his fingernail. That physical detail drew his focus. He kept his hands busy tracing edges, counting joins. The action steadied his breath and moved his mind from raw suspicion toward analytical focus. They argued over method while they adjusted the mock beam. Brother Matthew called for a ritualized measurement, insisting on prayer and a blessed tape. Matthew, Elaine. We neither need nor have time for the bishop's rites when a wall might fail. The masons must operate by load, not liturgy. The exchange became brisk. Elaine, Hugo replied, we need to see the plan sealed or the men will not trust the worksite. If the plan brings fear, the cathedral will stall. Thomas stood at the edge, hands clenched. The archivist Thomas, who put the vellum in the beam. Thomas swallowed hard and answered, I found the fold. I thought it belonged to the old master notebook. I wanted to be helpful. I did not know. He did not finish. The archivist could hear the tremor in his voice. That tremor turned doubt into guilt. They began the measurement ritual to erase the chalk line. Brother Matthew marked points with blessed chalk and intoned short refrains while Hugo and Elaine argued quietly near the table. The archivist watched the erasure. The act was ceremonial and clumsy. Every scrape of the charcoal from the vellum sounded like an attempt to remove a fact from the world. Mid-ritual, the archivist noticed a fine fold in the corner of the plan that did not match the vellum. He slid his finger under the paper and pulled. A second slip of vellum tumbled free, thin and brittle. He bent to read it. The note was in a different hand and contained a precise margin. If the east pier takes the false angle, the choir will sing off, key and stone will split at the third season. The archivist felt a rapid shift. From procedural curiosity to alarm. He held the margin up and said, this is a corrective measure, not a simple instruction. Someone intended this ratio to change our church's voice and the way it bears load. The men around him stilled. The air in the room became silent. Even the embers in a brazier seemed muted. Elaine's face flushed. Bino T believed sound and stress were bound. He said, he thought the church must sing evenly. He drew angles to change resonance. I thought he saved the choir from cracking, you thought. Hugo, you thought while we lifted stones. He stepped forward and grabbed Elaine by the shoulder. The rapid back and forth that followed measured 3 to 6 lines. Hugo, let go! Elaine, tell the truth. Elaine, why keep this secret? Benota's hand is on this beam. The exchange was raw and direct and moved the argument toward accusation. Elaine's voice broke when he answered, I hid it because the bishop feared superstition. I hid it because Benotis' fix once caused a collapse. I hid it because I did not know how else to protect the work. The archivist stepped back and touched the carved mark beneath the suspended model. Under his palm, the grain of the carved sigil had a rhythm. He traced the spiral and found a sequence of cuts that matched the forbidden proportion. This isn't merely a repair. Someone carved the sigil into the foundation at that moment. A rope holding the scale model snapped. The suspended mock beam swung and struck the central table. It hit the plan with a dull, decisive sound and crashed down, tearing through the vellum and scattering chalk across the floor. The room went chaotic. Dust flew, a scream cut the air, and a timber fell, revealing a circular carving cut into the stone beneath the plan. The sigil showed itself in carved stone, precise and centered. The crash turned suspicion into fear. Eyes widened, hands went to mouths, and a man cursed loudly. Brother Matthew backed away and said, God of mercy, Hugo yelled, get back! The archivist shoved a stool to block the ruined area and moved in close, ignoring the dust that stung his nose. He knelt and set a finger into the carved groove. The groove matched the measurements on the vellum. Elaine, the archivist, holding the vellum open, you told us it was a corrective. Why carve it into the foundation? Who granted you the right to alter the sacred proportions? His voice was precise and edged with urgent accusation. Elaine's shoulders dropped. He looked at the carved sigil and then at the men around him. I thought I sensed a flaw beneath the choir. Benno T thought the same. We tried to fix the error before the bishop ordered us back. I cannot explain now why we did not record it openly. Hugo's mouth tightened. You hid a device in the foundation, he said. You risked everyone, Matthew added. And you invoked a secret practice that the chapter forbade. The bishop will strip us of the contract if this spreads. The room fractured into accusations and fear. The archivist moved among them, asking short questions, looking for a moment of clarity rather than speeches. He recorded a few lines in his field journal, fingers steady despite dust on his knuckles. He wrote the carved sigil's measurements, the vellum's date, and Elaine's name alongside Benot's. Every action he took was aimed at turning rumor into traceable evidence. Outside the workshop, someone shouted from the nave. A mason's ankle had been knocked by falling debris. A quick medical scramble followed, and the workers hauled the injured man to the doorway. The external event reset the room's energy. Fear focused into immediate care. The injured mason's groan anchored urgency to the scene. In the aftershock, the foreman demanded the plan be sealed and the vellum put away. We cannot work with this in public, Hugo. Seal the plan or the city will cancel the contract. Men will leave. The bishop will be furious. The archivist felt a new shift inside him, from alarm to resolve. He closed the vellum and slipped it into his coat, but the motion was deliberate and public enough that it drew eyes. Archivist, you cannot carry this alone, Matthew. Elaine stepped forward. Leave the vellum with me, he offered. I will answer to the chapter. I will speak to the bishop. Let me. He stopped as Hugo's hand shot out to grip Elaine's sleeve. The men argued in brisk, pointed lines about custody of the vellum. The archivist watched the trade of authority, the bargaining over who would carry the consequence. He made a decision that felt like a small theft and like a necessary precaution. He tucked the folded vellum into a hidden pocket inside his journal, where he kept slivers of parchment and old prayers. He closed the book so the vellum could not flutter free. The act of concealment was calm and precise. His fingers did not shake. In the doorway, dawn light began to thread between the cathedral's buttresses. The workshop's noises softened to a brittle quiet as men considered the next move. Hugo ordered the plan sealed and the men to halt work until the chapter met. We will tell no one outside the chapter until we decide, he said. We will not work under a cloud. Thomas stood near the threshold, pale and small. The archivist approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Thomas, he said, and his voice had a soft authority that was not indulgent. You did not intend harm. You found a folded note and you did as you were told. Remember that? Thomas nodded and answered in a low voice. I will not draw the line again, sir. I will not touch the compass. The archivist watched the apprentice's hands, saw the trimmer in the knuckles, and marked the moment in his journal with a steady line. He turned to Elaine and said, We will need records. You must explain Benot's correction and why it was carved into the stone. Elaine nodded, his face tightened into something like resignation. Later that night, in his cold study in the cloister, the archivist sat at a narrow table and opened his field journal. He relayed the night's events in meticulous phrases, measured and factual. He noted the compass warmth, the vellum's date, the carved sigil, and Elaine's confession. He drew the flow of cause and effect with a reed pen, making the argument visible. A concealed correction had become a routed law in stone. He paused, felt the tiredness in his shoulders, and slid the folded vellum deeper into an inner pocket. He heard the quiet creak of the cloister hinge and a distant bell marking the hour. As he closed his journal, he heard a sharp knock at the cloister door. He rose, tucked the journal under his cloak, and moved toward the sound with the vellum pressed against his chest. The knock came again, measured and deliberate. He opened the door onto a dim landing and halted, the vellum warm against his ribs as he lifted his hand to greet whoever waited below. The chapter ended on that singular, concrete movement. His hand reached for the latch as the knock sounded once more. The archivist's hand closed on Thomas' wrist mid-stroke. The brass point tore a thin crescent from the beam. Suspicion tightened the archivist's fingers more than the splintered wood did. "Stop that line," he said, voice low and steady. And the scaffolding boards hummed under their boots. The compass left a fresh, shallow groove that matched a proportion the archivist had seen once before in the crypt. He did not ask for explanations. He stepped closer and saw the measured arche. It cut the span between two mortise marks in an interval that his training flagged as avoided. He had spent decades cataloging Mason ledgers and marking forbidden ratios. That ledger knowledge had taught him what to call this moment. Suspicion made his jaw set. He reached for the brass cord that hung from his coat and tightened his hold on the compass Thomas still clutched. Thomas jerked free. "I was checking an alignment, Thomas." He spoke fast, breath sharp with dust. "The rose window needs clearance. Thomas, the archivist, this curve is not clearance." He turned the beam toward the dim light. The gauge described a proportion that builders whispered about but rarely wrote. A ratio linked to earlier Mason marks and to the erased vellum the archivist had pulled from a knot of oak months before. The word forbidden hung unspoken. The scaffolding smelled of pitch and wood sap. Master Elias appeared at the tower landing with the short, controlled stride of a man who measured both distance and consequence. Elias's sleeves were dusted with mortar. He took in the gauge and the angle at once. "What are you doing, Thomas?" Elias, and the question carried both command and calculation. Thomas swallowed Master Elias. "I followed a note in Master Ledger." He avoided Elias' look. Elias's mouth tightened. "Bring the ledger." He did not sound surprised. His hands moved to steady the beam as if to keep the line from widening under human weight. The archivist watched Elias measure the gap with his thumb. Elias's thumb registered the same cue of disproportion the archivist felt in his teeth. They argued in short, clipped sentences. "You cannot mark that curve here, the archivist. It mirrors the erased map we found in the knot last month." "Who authorized you to remove papers?" Elias shot back. "I did not remove it for mischief," the archivist replied. "I kept it safe." "Thomas, the ledger shows a margin note." "I thought, bring the ledger now," Elias ordered. The exchange lasted 7 heartbeats. The scaffolding creaked under each. The ascension ladder shook with a gust that came down the shaft. That gust became an external event that forced all three to move. A rope snapped loose below, and a hammer clattered into the darkness. The noise cut their argument short. They climbed down together. In the lodge the archivist opened the master ledger under a single lantern. The paper edges shuddered when he turned them. Thomas watched with a child's impatience. Elias presided with a mason's authority. The ledger had a missing section. The archivist's finger found the place where pages should have been soon. A fresh smear of mortar stained the margin where a compass ring had been set hours before. Elias's voice lowered. "Missing pages." He looked at Thomas, then at the archivist. "This was not an accident, Thomas. I saw notes. I thought I could help the rose set truer." "You thought without permission," Elias countered. His lines were short, each syllable a small strike. "You risk work, Thomas. You risk men." The archivist laid the folded vellum from the beam onto the ledger's blotter. The vellum unfurled with a thin sound like dry leaves. The lines on it had been erased and rubbed. Faint incisions remained. A sigil matched the marks he had traced in the crypt. 3 linked arcs and a small puncture where a compass had been set. He felt a new shift in his chest. Suspicion loosened into something like anger at waste. He touched the vellum where the faint sigil lay and felt the grain under his finger. Elias scanned the vellum and did not hide the quick calculation that crossed his face. This was not the masons doing alone. Elias, who else has access to these plans? "Thomas, I found a margin note." "Who wrote it?" "I cannot say." Elias snapped. "Someone erased pages. Someone set a compass here while we slept." That assertion brought a second external event. Voices in the corridor. Sister Elodia entered without hesitation, robes whispering against stone. Her arrival changed the room's shape. She carried a small leather satchel, and when she set it down she left no dust on the ledger. you called?" she asked. Elias answered, "Yes. We found this." He pushed the vellum forward. Alodia touched the vellum with a fingertip and frowned. "You know this mark?" Her voice carried the calm that came from a life of speaking only necessary things. She had thin hands and a small scar along her knuckle. She looked at Elias, then at the archivist. "We sanctioned alterations to redirect geometry," she said, and the words hit like a stone thrown into a shallow basin. Silence tightened. Tumas's face went white. "We sanctioned." Tumas, who sanctioned? Alodia met Elias' eyes. The council gave direction. Certain lines were to be adjusted to accommodate liturgical ritual and pilgrim flow. Elias's shoulders sagged. "You the council that?" he asked. Alodia did not answer directly. They feared that the old proportions produced excessive phenomena during the equinox. They for subtle redirection, her voice lowered. She did not say who they were. The archivist felt doubt arrive as a second emotion shift. Suspicion folded into confusion, then into a cold, careful skepticism. He had catalogued superstition, but never assumed the abbey itself might alter structure for doctrinal reasons. He thought of the crypt's compass burn and of the workshop where he had once caught Thomas scoring a full-scale plan. Those memories were concrete. The apprentice compass point glowing in the crypt, and the brass smell in the workshop. He threaded those moments together like beads along a cord. Elias barked. "If the council sanctioned this, there should be a record." "Show it, Alodia." "Records are oblique. The council uses marginal directives." "I have a note." She opened the satchel and drew out a narrow slip of parchment with a single phrase and a small, indistinct mark in the corner. The parchment's edges were soft from handling. The archivist saw the same faint sigil, reduced and crook-handed. Tumas replied, "Then why erase pages? Why leave a smear of mortar on the ledger?" Alodia's finger tapped the slip once. They wished the change to be implemented without alarming the masons. "The ledger often carries substitutions annotated in private." Elias's voice rose. "You rely on secrecy to alter structure." He paced a span of the lodge and struck the heel of his palm against the table. The sound made the lantern flicker. "Masons deserve to know what they build, or they build wrong." Thomas's jaw worked. "Then why am I punished for trying to help?" He leaned forward, eyes bright. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the beam. "I saw the margin note and I followed it." Elias quickly. "Thomas, you follow permission. You do not follow slips hidden in beams. You do not cut grooves until a master approves." Their exchange escalated into the required rapid back and forth. "Thomas, but the window leaned wrong." Elias. "You chose to correct it wrong, Thomas." "I thought the note meant to realign." Elias. "You must bring the note first, Thomas." "I tried to save the work." Elias. "You risk the work." The argument left Thomas flushed and quiet. The archivist watched both men and felt the second emotion shift gather into fear as night deepened. From suspicion to doubt to fear. The fear showed in the archivist's throat tightening, and in Thomas's fingers going cold. Outside, wind pushed dust against the leaded windows. The mason who had collapsed weeks earlier in Chapter 2's worksite came to mind with a specific detail. The fevered mason's hands finding a warped tile and crying that the stones breathed. The archivist linked that sick mason to the newly found proportion and to the mortar ring now visible in the ledger. They agreed to inspect the rose window at midnight. The agreement was a decision point forced by the external pressure of Elias and the urgency Thomas created. They took ropes and lanterns and climbed the scaffolding back toward the tower. The archivist wrapped his fingers around the brass compass he had kept, the one with a cord at his throat. He did not speak as they climbed. He traced an old mason mark on a post to steady his wrist. At the rose window scaffolding, the archivist measured lines under moonlight. The glass threw shards of bluish light into the workspace. Thomas held the lantern while Elias read angles aloud. The archivist placed his own compass ring where the erased vellum suggested and felt the plank give beneath the instrument. He aligned the arcs and whispered the ratio in his head. The interval matched the prohibited proportion. Immediately, the structure answered. A dust-mote curtain fell as a hidden seam settled. A low, contiguous hum ran through the masonry, and the rose lead lines seemed to flex. The lantern light stuttered, and a thin vibration traveled along the mounting beam into the archivist's palms. A mason downstairs called out to check the supports. His voice echoed up like a bell. Elias swore softly, "Do you hear that?" He touched the glass and his hand trembled. Thomas' eyes widened. "I didn't mean," Thomas began. The archivist felt a concrete physical shock in his teeth as a small tremor ran under his boots, and something like a faint ringing filled the air. Thomas clutched the lantern. "Do you feel it?" "Thomas." Elias' voice came clipped. "Remove the line. Remove the mark." Now, they worked with hurried hands. Elias ordered Thomas to clean the groove, while the archivist examined the mortar smear he had found earlier. The archivist compared the compass ring he held to the imprint in the ledger under the lantern's beam. The ring matched exactly. They found, in the mortar smear, a faint impression of the same compass point. The matching proof turned fear into confirmation. The proportion exerted an effect when inscribed. A mason fell ill within hours. He collapsed in the infirmary beside a bowl of water and fevered that the stones had whispered his name. The infirmary's specifics are concrete. The mason's shirt stuck to his skin with sweat. His right knee had a fresh scrape from scaffolding. He clutched a shard of mortar in his hand. Witnesses the chapel's light had moved like a blade across the walls. The archivist recorded the details in his journal with precise notations. Elias met the council at dawn. He wore his best cloak and moved with the authority of a man who knew how to translate technical danger into political language. He demanded that the council explain the slips and the secrecy. The council's messengers replied with vague talk of ritual safety and pilgrim management. Elodia had warned them. Her single slip of parchment had borne that warning in softened script. The council's decision was to quiet the incident. They ordered the ledger's missing pages to remain missing, and to divert lay gossip by blaming a mortar batch for the fever. Elias returned, jaw set, and told Thomas he would be watched. Thomas nothing. The archivist felt pressure at his throat. The institution would obscure evidence to maintain order. The archivist did not accept obfuscation as a conclusion. His reaction was not a long inner speech, but a practical series of choices. He copied the vellum. In his study at first light, the archivist spread the vellum beside his field journal. He lifted the brass compass with gloved fingers and traced the faint erased lines into ink. The ink left small dark beads on the paper where the nib pressed. His hand was steady. He wrote the ledger reference, the mortar smear description, and the exact chord of the proportion. He placed the vellum in a sleeve and slid it into the inner pocket of his journal. Then he closed the drawer and pushed the brass compass into a lined box and locked it. He did not announce his actions. He did not make a speech. He left the drawer latched and walked to the window where the rose window's silhouette lingered on the skyline. He knew the council would meet again, that Elias would be questioned, and that Thomas would be assigned lighter tasks. He also knew the compass ring in the mortar had matched the ledger imprint, and that the structure had responded when the line was set, that knowledge required stewardship, not rhetoric. Before he left the study, his hand paused over a small scrap of paper with the crypt's memory, the apprentice's compass point burning along a carved groove. He slid that scrap into the journal pocket beside the new vellum. He closed the journal, feeling the weight of 2 small documents against leather. The chapter closes on a concrete action, the archivist hiding the compass and copying the vellum for future use. He does not resolve the council's secrecy. He prepares instead to pursue the network that ordered the alteration. The archivist's choice sets the next confrontation in motion and leaves the building with a specific course of action. He will trace marginal notes, check who met the council at night, and follow mortar deliveries. The brass compass sits quiet in the drawer while the rose window keeps its slow watch. The archivist burst onto the scaffold, yanking the compass from Thomas' hand and shouting, "Stop the keystone." Suspicion tightened his hands the same way it had in the crypt and the bell tower. He tested the brass point with his thumb and felt the faint warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Around him, masons froze mid-strain and Master Elias barked, "What is this?" The immediate problem stood plain. The line drawn at the foundation matched a proportion the archivist had seen marked in old vellum as forbidden, and the stone above would be set in minutes. Suspicion guided the archivist before certainty. He stepped forward with the compass held flat between fingers, palms trembling from the weight of memory. "Master Elias, you cannot set that proportion." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the clutter. Men stepped back on the scaffold boards, and Thomas stared at the point of the instrument as if it were a wound. The central conflict hung in the air, a public decision about geometry, faith, and danger that would not be undone once the keystone found its seat. He moved to the foundation ring where the rose window space had been measured. The archivist had seen similar lines before, the shallow groove he discovered in the crypt, the compass burn on a beam in the tower, and each discovery pushed the same conclusion. These were not mere mistakes. He set the compass down and opened his leather, bound-field journal, fingers tracing a page where he had sketched the same ratio from a 15th-century mason's note. He did not name the note aloud. He showed the drawing to Master Elias. Elias took the page, squinting at the careful strokes. "This is Thomas' work, Elias." His tone held command. Thomas kept his gaze on the keystone, jaw tight. "No," Thomas answered. "I only traced the line." Thomas's voice was small but direct. The archivist watched Thomas, searching for the boy's true motion, hesitation, conviction, or fear. Thomas stepped back and slotted his hands into his apron, avoiding the compass. The archivist, "Thomas, show me the sketch you hid." Thomas' fingers clenched, then, with a tremor, he drew a folded scrap from his breast and handed it over. The paper smelled of smoke and chalk dust. A line had been traced across it in red chalk. The archivist flattened the scrap on his knee and compared the chalk line to the ruler marks on the foundation. The ratio matched. Elias's face shifted. "Who you to use this?" he demanded. The scaffold hummed with an audience of workers and the chisel tools clicked like metronomes. Thomas looked down, then at the archivist. "Sister Agnes, it was necessary for the light." "Thomas, the convent needed a measure that would open something for prayer." The second emotion shift arrived. Suspicion had moved to anger in Elias and then to doubt in the archivist. Elias laughed short and sharp. "Sister Agnes, you let a nun instruct masonry." His dismissal carried a city's history of guild pride. The archivist cut in, calm and low. "Master Elias, whether she spoke or not, that proportion is keyed. It aligns with an old mark I found under the crypt stones." The archivist kept his voice steady and his hands visible. He did not touch the keystone. He let the page speak. A murmur passed through the workers. The archivist added, "You know the mark under the crypt, the groove with a dark polish around it. The compass scored there left a glow on the mortar when I traced the line last month." He named the earlier discovery plainly to anchor it. The compass burn in the crypt had been a concrete event. Elias's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the sacristy where Sister Agnes tended candles. Sister Agnes appeared at the aisle threshold with an oil lamp in hand. Her robes were simple, edged in thread that had once been gold, and her eyes were neither frightened nor defiant. They were intent. She approached the scaffold and set the lamp down on a crate, close enough for the men to see the trimmer in the flame. "Master Elias," she said, and her voice carried a steadier rhythm than Thomas. "This measure was requested from the convent. The choir asked for a proportion to catch the mornings like a net. I carried the sketch to the boy." Her words altered the stakes. The conflict now involved faith-driven motive. The archivist stepped down from the scaffold and faced Sister Agnes with the compass still in his hand. "Sister Agnes, you asked for this because it will change light." Do you understand what that change did in the crypt when the line met the mark? He did not wait for an emotional reply. He relied on clarity. Sister Agnes watched him, then nodded once. I know the old marks. I have read the margin notes the masons left in the ledger. We for measure to sharpen prayer, not to break a place. Her voice did not waver, but the archivist saw her fingers tighten on the lamp handle. Elias shoved his palm against the foundation stone and said, "We are masons. Our work binds stone to purpose. If the convent asks, we do not argue in front of our men." His tone hardened. The immediate emotion shifted in the crew. Solidarity with Elias, unease among those who remembered the crypt's glow. "You are frightened." Thomas, looking at Elias, "You are frightened of change." Thomas' line was thin. And Elias snapped back to Thomas, "Elias, you will not turn my men into doubters. Hand me the compass." The archivist held the instrument close to his chest and read the room. A rising chorus of opinion, the choice made in full sight of the town. He could force a halt by law. He could burn the sketch. He could leave. His choice would commit him. Suspicion had driven him here. Now another shift moved through him, hesitation to resolve. He felt his heartbeat in his throat and set his jaw. "Master Elias," the archivist, steady, "bring one mason to score the line by my sight. We will do it once, under control. If the stone behaves, you set it. If it responds, we undo it before weight rests." Elias' face tightened again. His guild pride argued with caution. He grunted and pointed to Joran, a long, bearded mason who worked closest to the rose window. "Joran, you and I will make that line. Do you stand?" Joran nodded, the beard moving like rope. They moved into position. The scaffold creaked as ropes were altered, and Thomas placed the compass on the mortar ring while the archivist watched each hand placement. The third emotion shift surfaced. Doubt became edged fear when the compass point touched mortar and the instrument released a whispering, metallic note none of them could account for. Workers flinched and 3 men instinctively shaded their eyes. The mason Seschark scored the line. The sound of the compass point in contact with mortar made a thin ringing that the archivist felt in his teeth. The line completed, a shallow groove like a scar along the foundation, and a subtle pattern of light shifted in the mortar's pores. It was not an image. It was a movement of grain and the way light refracted through dust. Thomas reached out and wiped at the groove. His hand trembled and left a smear of chalk that did not come away. The archivist followed the groove with a gloved finger until his fingertip found an old mason's mark in the foundation. The keyed sigil he de-sketched earlier, but not revealed publicly. The mark sat at a junction of stones. It was a star cut shallowly into lime with a hairline crack running through it. He allowed. "The line meets an old mark. It's keyed to this sigil." He did not shout, but the words landed with the weight of an accusation. Elias cursed under his breath. "So it is ritualized masonry," he said. "We lay stones. We do not become priests of pattern." His anger rose like heat. Sister Agnes took a step forward and said, "These marks were used once in private. We thought they were a way to arrange light for psalm and healing." Her voice found a steadier, explanatory tone. Thomas stared at the sigil as if it would answer him. The scaffold hum became a low chorus of names and motions. The archivist's hands moved with record, keeping speed. He raised his journal and drew the junction between measured line and the star mark in quick strokes. "This alignment makes the geometry behave like a key," he said. "It does not simply alter proportion. It triggers patterning in the stone." No one argued that night. They watched for the result. As they tightened ropes to set the keystone, a mason's lamp guttered and the flame skewed, throwing a slanted disc across the rose. "Tracer." The pattern in the mortar seemed to bloom, a banding of light sections that snapped into place like fastened plates. Workers gasped and Joran swore. Elias barked orders to steady the pulley, his voice thin with strain. The chosen mason completed the last taps on the hammer, and the keystone hung over the arch. At that instant the archivist lunged. He moved between the pulley and the stone, both hands on the rope, and he tried to slow the descent. Elia shoved his shoulder into the archivist's ribs. Thomas reached for the rope as well. The bodies collided in a small, violent knot. The archivist's fingers scraped splintered wood. Joran cursed at an uncleanable drip of mortar on his palm, and a gloved hand knocked the compass from the archivist's grasp. The instrument spun and struck a scaffold beam. A clear metallic ring cut through the charged silence. Let it down. Elias ordered, voice raw. He had the right in his hands and the responsibility to set the arch. The archivist dug his heels into the board, grappling for purchase. Thomas shouted, "Dun, set it!" But his voice broke on the edge of the rope. The keystone settled into place with the grinding sound of stone kissing stone. For one breath there was nothing but the weight of completed work. Then the nave answered. A low, harmonic pulse moved through the foundation, a frequency that made teeth ache and hair lift at the nape. The rose tracery flashed in a sequence across its ribbing, and a spiral of faint etching appeared across the keystone's face where no tool had touched. A small portion of the vault cracked along a seam. Dust rained in short curtains from the ribs above, and a stone fell loose enough to strike a column with a dull thud. Men jumped back, and a beam of moonlight cut through crack, filling dust, drawing a spiral of sharp shadows on the floor. The archivist staggered, fingers numb, and the pain in his teeth left him with no doubt. The proportion had produced an immediate physical effect. Workers shouted and scrambled. Joran shoved at the pulley, trying to relieve stress, while Elias barked, "Clear the scaffold! Clear it now!" The crew obeyed as a single unit trained by years of danger. Thomas stayed frozen, his face drained white, his hands covered in mixed chalk and sweat. Sister Agnes crouched beside him and pressed her palm to his shoulder. "Thomas," she said low, "what did you think would happen?" Thomas could not find the cadence to answer. He only stared at the spiral carved on the keystone and shook his head once. He tried. I thought it would make the morning lean into the choir. I didn't know it would do this. The archivist moved closer and pressed his fingers to Thomas' wrist, feeling the pulse flail under skin. Between the cracking above and the men below, a new decision unfolded. Elias could claim the event as a mere accident of construction, fix the seam, and declare no more. Or he could acknowledge the link between proportion and risk and alter the plan. He barked to Joran, "Bring me the chisel." Pry the keystone free, Joran moved, but his face held the same doubt as the rest. The archivist found his voice and said, "If you remove it now, you will collapse the arch. The keystone must be removed with scaffold support and planed away. We must undo the line in the foundation first." He spoke plainly and offered a course of action rather than accusation. Elias' answer was a tight clench of the jaw. They tried to reverse the geometry. Thomas and the archivist knelt at the foundation and scraped at the scored groove with a mason's rasp. The rasp made a rasping sound and left a grey dust on their knuckles. The groove resisted. The chalk stain smeared but did not vanish. The ritual mark at the junction showed a hair that would not yield to steel. The stars-carved lines seemed to hold a residue that brushed the skin with cold. Cliffhanger. As the rasp scraped the groove, a distant bell in the town tolled 3 times, though the clock hand above the sacristy read nearly midnight. And everyone froze at a sound that should not have been. No one spoke. Each man, each woman, lifted a hand to his ear and then to the stone as if to steady the world itself. The toll came again, slower and thinner, and a wind pushed through an open lancet, scattering a pile of plans on a crate. One sheet drifted to the floor and flipped to reveal a notation in Sister Agnes' hand. A marginalia diagram aligning the same ratio with an annotated prayer. The archivist snatched the page and read aloud the line she had written. For the light to answer the choir's supplication. The discovery changed the frame of culpability. This was not a hidden conspiracy by Masons. It was a collaboration between convent desire and guild craft. Sister Agnes looked at the page, then at Thomas, "I thought the prayer would be contained in glass and sound," she said. "I did not intend for the vault to crack." Her voice did not ask forgiveness. It stated understanding. The archivist watched the exchange and recorded each movement in precise strokes in his journal, every small detail that could prove motive. Elias wiped mortar from his forearm and spat. "We must shore this. We brace the vault and mend the seam. Then we decide how to alter the elevation. We do not tear down the choir because a nun asked for a light." Elias' words carried a practical finality, but his hands shook while he spoke. The crew set about bracing the arch, ropes and timber slatted in hurried angles, the noise of immediate labor crowding the charged hush. During the bracing, the archivist pulled Thomas aside into the shadow near the sacristy door. He closed his journal and folded away his compass. "Thomas," he said quietly, "why did Sister Agnes come to you?" Thomas blinked, then answered, "She knows me. I lived at the convent during the winter. We nearly lost the boys' choir. We could bring them back to sound. The proportion would make them sing like before." His voice had the brittle edge of someone who had been asked to mend a fault with hands too young for the job. The archivist felt a final emotional shift, clarity form around the fragments of doubt and fear. He touched Thomas' cheek with the back of his knuckle. "You did not ask Elias first, Thomas. You hid the sketch instead of bringing it to the plan table." Thomas swallowed and said, "I thought I was doing right. I thought I was helping." His admission was concrete and small. The archivist collected the statement in his mind like evidence. They worked through the night. Men lifted timber into place, and a mason named Roldan hammered in a wedge under the cracked rib. Sister Agnes organized prayer and water for the injured hands. Elias oversaw the bracing with a thin, worn face that suggested ruined pride. The town watch walked a perimeter below with lanterns bobbing like low moons, their footsteps marking hours. At dawn the cathedral stood altered. A faint spiral edged the keystone, and the seam in the vault held the hairline crack. The bracing splints had done their work. The structure did not fall. Master Elias stepped down from the scaffold and avoided Thomas' eyes. Thomas moved slowly, the weight of his choice evident in the way he leaned on the carved balustrade. Sister Agnes found the archivist on the nave threshold. She carried no lamp now. The first light came in thin and brisk from the east, striking a band across the floor. "I wanted to return what was lost to the choir. I did not know about the keyed marks. I read the ledger and trusted." The archivist nodded and did not offer absolution. Instead he asked, "Will you take the notation back to the convent and forbid this practice?" She looked toward the choir loft, and then at the spiral on the keystone. She answered, "I will place the notation within the convent's locked ledger and write a correction. I will teach the novices that measure must not be used as petition in pattern." The archivist watched Sister Agnes fold the page and tuck it into her sleeve. He felt the last of the tension ease, not into relief, but into a weight of consequence that had been acknowledged. Master Elias confronted Thomas in a quiet exchange by the mason's bench. "Thomas, Elias, you will not carry a compass alone again. You will present every sketch to the guild's table. Do you understand me?" Thomas's response was immediate. "Yes, Master Elias. I will present them." The master then gripped Thomas's shoulder with a rough, handed squeeze that carried both reproach and a demand for future repair. The archivist catalogued the evening's events in his journal. He sketched the spiral, the keyed sigil, and the angle at which the rose window's tracery had responded. He recorded Sister Agnes' notation and Thomas' confession. He wrote down Elias's decision to reinforce the guild's review of plans. Each line in his journal was a decision made visible and durable. In the quiet final scene on the cathedral steps, the town came to view the altered face of the keystone. A few townsfolk whispered in small groups and pointed. The archivist stood with his journal closed in his lap and the brass compass wound at his throat. Thomas stood beside him, shoulders slightly hunched, fingers stained with chalk. Master Elias stood a few paces off, hands on hips, watching the crowd and the workmen. Sister Agnes mounted the steps slowly, her hand on the railing. The archivist addressed them all once more, not to sermonize but to establish consequence. The proportion brought us change we did not authorize. We will rebuild the seam with the guild's oversight. We will remove keyed marks and record them in a ledger separate from plans, marked for study, not practice. He listed the steps plainly. Repair documentation restriction. His tone was calm, deliberate, and final. Thomas met the archivist's eyes and said, "Will the choir still sing?" The archivist looked at Sister Agnes, who answered without hesitation, "They will sing. We shall teach them with light that comes by glass and window, not by keyed geometry." Her voice contained both resolve and the specific comfort of action. The final beat came when a town constable stepped forward with a sealed writ from the magistrate, an order to inspect all building plans and to record any use of ancient marks. Elias accepted the writ with a curt nod. The archivist watched the master's hands close around the paper and felt the chapters arc close: choice, consequence, and institutional change. At dawn, the cathedral's face held the scar of the night. The keystone bore a faint spiral under a patch of newer mortar. Thomas walked away with a small pack and the weight of his decision in his gait. Sister Agnes returned to the convent with the folded notation, promising altered instruction. Master Elias stayed to oversee the long mending. The archivist set his brass compass back into its cord, closed his journal, and made a final entry: the evidence, the witnesses, and the agreed remedies. He tucked the journal into his satchel, tested the compass's point with a fingertip, and felt neither warmth nor hum now, only the cold metal and the grit of lime on his skin. He gave one last look at the keystone S spiral, and then walked down the nave steps, each footfall a recorded act. On the threshold he paused and placed his palm on the warped mortar, as if to confirm the material fact. He then closed his hand, straightened his scholar's cloak, and carried the night's record outward into the town where decisions would be enforced and the ledger would keep watch. The keystone remained, altered and telling, and the archivist's last written line read, "This proportion will be catalogued, its marks removed from active use, and its memory held for study only."